If you are hiring somebody who is expected to be a lawyer in your company, and in your company, lawyers are required to have difficult money conversations with clients. Once a client gets out of retainer, the lawyer is the one who is expected to call. The lawyer is the one who is expected to cease work if the client does not pay the bill. If the person that you're hiring is kind of like, I don't really have a strong view about money one way or another. I don't really care if I work for someone who's not paying the bill, and they're indifferent to it, you have a problem. Hi, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Crushing Chaos with Law Firm Mentor podcast, where today we are going to talk about the show Love is Blind. And you're probably thinking, what does that have to do with a law firm? Well, I'm going to teach you right now. Okay, so how does the show Love is Blind relate to law firm ownership and in particular hiring in law firms? Okay, so hiring is one of these topics that comes up a lot. We all have to do it at some point if we want to grow and scale our law firm. Even those of us that are doing the lean law firm that really only want to have a well-functioning small team, all the way up to those of us who want a McMansion of a law firm and are trying to get to the mega millions and the mega billions in the law firm world. Well, you're going to have to deal with getting people through the door and getting the right people in the right seats on your bus if you want to get where you want to go as a law firm owner. But there are some challenges that come with that. And I think that it is very helpful for us to look at some of the parts of our pop culture that have become talking points that can give us things to think about that are a little bit more interesting, that can give us something outside of just the academic world, but a good analogy for how we should approach hiring in law firms. And so the show Love is Blind is something that I personally love. You know, it's kind of one of my guilty pleasures. So for those of you that aren't acquainted with it, the gist of it is that there is a show where the premise of the show is to ask the question, is love blind? And the way that they test that theory, in theory, is the participants, male and female, will date. This is a heteronormative show. So men and women date each other in the pods. Okay. There are these rooms that are built where you cannot see the person who is in the adjacent room, but you have the ability to hear them and talk to them through the wall. And after going on several dates with all of the participants, you kind of narrow down who are your favorite people. And then ultimately a relationship forms and people have to decide relatively quickly in a matter of weeks, are they going to propose? And that is the only way that you will get to see the person that you are dating. And then having proposed to that person sight unseen, you start a relationship outside of the pods where in a relatively short period of time you get married. Or you say, I don't want to get married to this person. Okay. Now, there is a question about whether or not they are compelled to say yes or no at the wedding. But for our purposes, we're going to go with what I believe is the theory that most people understand, which is that the dating participants are encouraged to say yes or no to their potential spouse at a wedding. And so the wedding happens, and then ultimately at the altar, when the question is posed, do you take this man or do you take this woman? There's an answer given that sometimes is yes and sometimes is no. Okay. Now, lots of seasons, lots of stuff has happened on lots of seasons. This is now season 8. And there are two couples in particular that I want to talk about because this particular season, I think, gave us a lot to think about in terms of how we would elect to hire people and how we do hire people in our law firms. So the first couple we're going to talk about is Sarah and Ben. Now, Sarah is actually, before I get into this, let me give a little trigger warning. We're going to talk about politics and religion, but we're not going to talk about it in the way that it's been talked about on the social media streets. Okay. You guys know that I'm a moderate. You guys know I love conservatives. I love liberals. I love men. I love women. I do not put myself into the camps of extremism on either side. And as a result of that, I find a lot of these conversations very unfortunate because I find them to be so polarizing that people with divergent views can't even discuss them without insulting each other and without a lot of the vitriol that I think is tearing our world apart. So I'm not going to engage in that. Please do not engage me or try to engage me in that because I'm not going there. Okay. But I'm mentioning that we're going to talk about politics and religion, not because we're going to go into what the beliefs are or what's right or wrong, but rather the fact that there are differences in those areas with the two couples that we're going to talk about. So with Sarah, Sarah has a sister who is a lesbian in a lesbian relationship, and Sarah is very much a proponent and supporter of the LGBTQIA community. She also feels strongly that her partner should feel strongly about social issues, should take a position, should have conversations about it. One of the things that came up, Sarah is a white woman. She asked about Black Lives Matter and she asked her partner, Ben, how you feel about that. And Ben basically said, I don't really have a strong opinion one way or the other. I think all people should be able to live in the world. I don't really know much more about it. And Sarah was taken aback and said, wow, these are some pretty strongly contested, discussed issues in our society. How don't you know more? How aren't you, whatever your position, how don't you have a stronger position one way or another? Ultimately, that was an area of disagreement. When they got out of the pods, they continued having disagreements, and the next disagreement was over religion. So Ben identified that he is a Christian, that he goes to church on a regular basis, and he invited Sarah to join him. And to her credit, she went, and she asked Ben, what are your church's views about the LGBTQIA plus community? And he said, I don't really know. And I found that kind of odd because I'm like, when you say Christian, most people have an ideology around Christian that has views about homosexuality. And, there are some churches that are progressive, are thought of as progressive, and they have, they state their views rather vocally. So it's not usually something that you wouldn't know the church's position on. But according to Ben, he did not know his church's position on the topic. So Sarah went and researched, and she found views that did not align with her views on the topic. Again, tried to engage Ben in the conversation. He was kind of like, well, I don't have a strong opinion one way or another. And this bothered Sarah. Now, I have seen a lot of debate online about whether or not Sarah and Ben should have continued their relationship, whether or not Sarah should have rejected Ben for his views, his religious views, his political views, his social activism or lack thereof. And the reality is, however the topics came out and however each of them discussed it, it was very clear that they were not on the same page. It was very clear that Sarah had views that did not align with Ben and vice versa. And they were both choosing a spouse, a lifelong partner, someone with whom to have children, someone with whom to merge families. And I thought it odd that people were, at least online, so highly opposed to the idea that your views about religion and politics should play any role in a marriage. I disagree. I think these are topics that are quite pertinent to how you ultimately are going to build your life and how you are going to educate your children. And having a spouse that does not have the same views on those topics, whatever the views are, can be challenging. And for some people, they feel very tepid about it altogether. But if one party feels very strong and the other party feels very tepid, there's a disconnect there. Okay, so we're going to talk about how that relates to hiring in just a moment, but I want to give a similar example with another couple, and this couple is Virginia and Devin. Devin is a basketball coach and also a youth sports advisor, and Virginia has a PhD and works in healthcare recruiting. So these two connect in the pods, create a relationship, and they're off and running. And at some point, after what appeared to be a romance that was going to go the distance, Virginia said no at the altar. And when people started asking the question, well, how could she say no? The things that came up were politics and religion again. So she asked specifically about Devin's political views, and he would not own his political views first. He was very tepid about them. But he did say, my family votes conservative. And he asked the question of Virginia, would it be a problem if we did not share, if we did not vote the same? And she said, well, it's kind of an issue, right? Her personal view is that that is something that matters to her at a really, really fundamental level. And the fact that her partner would not be aligned there is something that was a deal breaker. Another issue that came up with them was about money. Now, what I thought was interesting here was that this is a very common trend that is happening in our society just based on demographics and based on how our world is evolving, right? Women now have far more rights, at least currently, than they have had historically in the past. So women are making money and making much more money than they have made in the past. And that comes with certain challenges, right? So historically, women were the supportive partner in the relationship and were not expected to be the financial breadwinner. And men were the partner that protected and provided financially. And that heteronormative model for relationships has, even though may not fit our past demographics, is still brought forward as the way to conduct a relationship. And we coach lawyers from all over the country and see all forms of relationships in terms of partners working, partners earning and out earning their spouse. And many, many women lawyers out earn their partners, whether the partners are in comparable professions or not. So it's a common enough thing. And in fact, just based on the fact that we are in a group of highly educated business owners, you would expect that there to be a differential in the business owner and their employee spouse, at least to some degree. So very common to see that narrative about differences in men and women in earning, in relationships. And that's kind of becoming a theme that you're seeing in a lot of different relationship shows now because it's far more common in our society. The problem, however, is when two people don't agree on how to deal with money. Now, it isn't a deal breaker that people don't agree on how to deal with money. Oftentimes, you have two people that are not exactly 100% aligned on money when they get together. But getting married to someone when we have not kind of engaged with the terms of engagement around money, the how are we going to navigate our differences? How are we going to decide who pays what? How are we going to decide what's fair? How are we going to decide how much to spend versus save? How much to invest? Where to invest? Those types of questions are not small questions. And as a divorce lawyer, I can't help but note how significant the role of finance or disagreements about finance is in the dissolution of a marriage. So it is not unwise to want to explore that and want to get to a deeper level of agreement before one ultimately marries a person. Virginia, of course, has been ripped apart all over social media because Devin, the seemingly good guy, was somebody that she said no to. Now, after the show, after the Love is Blind season has concluded, they've already had the reunion show. It comes out that Virginia was paying for all of their dates. That she, of course, in the show, she raised that she wanted a prenuptial agreement. Devin reluctantly agreed to a prenuptial agreement. But even then, that still does not mean that two people are aligned on how to deal with money in their relationship. And she felt that that was something that needed further exploration, that they needed to get on the same page before they get married. Now, how do these two couples, Devin and Virginia on the one hand, Sarah and Ben on the other hand, how do these two couples teach us something about hiring in law firms? Well, I'm hoping by virtue of how I have raised these two couples and talked about their issues, that you already see the bright shining star that is the hiring training nugget that we can get from this show. Okay, so for those of you that haven't figured it out yet, it's pretty simple. You need to be aligned with somebody before you get in bed with them. At least if that bed is going to last a lifetime, right? So, what do I mean by that? Well, let's think about this. If in Sarah and Ben's scenario, you have two people who have a different barometer of how important a topic is, right? So it doesn't matter what the topic is, but it happens to be that these are important topics that they are at odds about, politics and religion, right? If both of you are non-religious and both of you believe that any person can have any faith, and as long as you believe in something outside of yourself, or even if you don't, it's not a big deal, that's fine. But you can't have one person who says the only and right way to be in the world is to be this particular religion. And I feel that any and all things that I decide in my life should be guided by this religion, and have another person say, yeah, I reject the principles of your religion and I reject going to church every Sunday, and I reject that your religious tenets should be the guiding pole star of my life. You can't create that way, right? It's kind of like law firm partnerships. We've had any number of partners come to us over the years and say, we're having some difficulties and they're really small and we just need a little help talking through. And then we have a conversation and it turns out one law firm owner wants to build a McMansion of a law firm, right? They want to have 7 locations in 7 different states. And they want each state to have its own 7-figure entity that's all under one umbrella. And they have a whole plan around how we're gonna like take over the US. And the other law firm owner says, I want to have a nice, quaint little company, me, my partner, and maybe 2 associates, and that's it. Right? You can't create those two things contemporaneously. It's impossible. They're not the same. So the fact that Sarah and Ben were not aligned on the role of religion, the extent of religion, the beliefs in a particular religion really was problematic. And it would be similarly problematic if you were to hire somebody who did not have strong beliefs in the area where you have strong beliefs, right? Now, it's a little bit different when we're talking about beliefs. We need to be clear about what we're talking about here. I'm not talking about your religious beliefs, okay? I'm not talking about discriminating against someone because they don't share your religion when you're hiring them in a law firm. But I'm talking about beliefs that go to the heart of the role, right? So if you are hiring somebody who is expected to be a lawyer in your company, and in your company, lawyers are required to have difficult money conversations with clients, right? Once a client gets out of retainer, the lawyer is the one who is expected to call. The lawyer is the one who is expected to cease work if the client does not pay the bill. And that is an expectation. It's something that's going to be evaluated on at annual reviews. It's something that you teach and train on regularly in your company. And the person that you're hiring is kind of like, I don't really have a strong view about money one way or another. I don't really care if I work for someone who's not paying the bill, and they're indifferent to it. You have a problem, right? Now, in this scenario, in an employer-employee scenario, you might be able to get a person to care about what you care about because it is a requirement for them to keep their job, i.e. their paycheck, right? So you might be able to instill in a person a certain level of give a shit. But the problem becomes that if they don't have that already, you are taking a huge gamble that they are going to ultimately learn how to care enough about this thing that you care about in order to align it with their interests so that their interest becomes compatible with your interest. And that is something that most times we say, just like in a personal relationship, that's not likely going to happen, right? People feel how they feel. If the person is not offended by working for free, it's probably because they would not be working for free. You'd be paying your lawyer, whether they collect on those receipts or not. So you have to be careful because you're putting your own interests at risk, the same way that Ben would be putting his interest in being a devout Christian at risk if he were to marry someone who is not also a devout Christian. And similarly, Sarah would be putting her interest in supporting the LGBTQIA community at risk if she were to marry somebody who seems to be indifferent to their rights, who seems to be indifferent to their struggle, who doesn't really seem to want to learn more about the topic. Okay? Virginia and Devin, same challenge, but slightly different. Okay? Their challenge is not about how strongly we feel. Their challenge is the fact that we have completely different views. One of us is facing east, the other of us is facing west. Okay? So Virginia asked quite directly, well, how do you vote? And Devin's answer was, well, my family votes conservative. Even that answer is problematic. Not because of what the answer was, it isn't a conservative versus liberal issue, but it is a concern that Devin couldn't even own and say, this is what I do, right? He's not speaking about it with his chest. It's almost like he's trying to induce Virginia into being okay. Like he's kind of talking around it, saying it softly, so that she will say, he's not exactly what I want, but I'm willing to work with him, or I'm willing to try it out, or I'm willing to go there. Not that great, right? It's kind of like, and this is like an interviewing technique that we teach here at Law Firm Mentor. In fact, one of the things that we go pretty deep in when we're in our People Academy, which is a part of our Essentials Plus membership, is we talk about how to engage people, whether it is a prospective client, a prospective employee, or even existing employee. Engage people about the things that matter to them so that you can learn more about them, right? And when you are engaging a prospective client, or a prospective employee rather, you really want to get a sense of what matters to them. How they say things matters as much as what they say. And when you're talking to someone and you get a sense that they are sidestepping, that they're avoiding, that they really don't want to go deep into the topic, you have to keep bringing it up. When you bring it up, you kind of get a non-answer answer. That's where you can have real challenge, and where you really have to be concerned about whether you're getting the truth, and two, about what you're going to get when you're in the relationship, i.e., once you marry the person, are these sidestepped views going to come out to be something that you don't align with, right? Whatever the person's views are, they need to say it with their chest, right? I believe X. And they need to be willing to talk about it. And Virginia ultimately said Devin was not willing to talk about it. He was not willing to go there. He was not willing to go deeper about things that matter to her. And then on the finance side, now this is like a biggie, right? Because we know, as I said before, as a divorce lawyer, we know the role that finance plays in the dissolution of relationships, and in particular, the dissolution of marriages. But it was rather significant that we started to hear little things about these two people and how they approach money that clearly did not align. On the one hand, you've got Virginia, who owns real estate. She's established in her career. You don't know her exact income, but we get the sense that she is earning well, right? She probably has a six-figure income. And then you hear Devin, and you get the sense that Devin might have a few financial challenges, but he also has choices that he makes about spending money that didn't align with the way that Virginia spent money, right? She's spending money on buying an asset, real estate. Devin was spending money on tennis shoes. Now, there's some debate online about whether or not his tennis shoes are collectibles, whether he has a tennis shoe collection that actually is worth something, whether we can value the tennis shoes. But for the most part, he says he loves tennis shoes because he's in sports and he's a coach, right? So he's spending $700 a pair once or twice a month. So he's spending $700 to $1,400 a month, which is over 10 grand a year on tennis shoes. And concurrently with that reality, he has medical debt. So on the one hand, you have told me that you have saved money for a house for when you get married, right? So you recognize the role and importance of savings, but at the same time, you've got medical debt that you haven't paid, and you've got a very expensive habit that might be an asset. We don't know. And he didn't refer to it as an asset or something he was collecting to be an asset. But ultimately, That's a very different financial picture, right? It's different choices, not inimical to a healthy relationship, but it does require a plan. It requires conversation. It could benefit from a financial coach. It can benefit from a financial planner, certainly a combined budget. A lot of difficult conversations that these two have not yet had. So I want you to think about that in the context of hiring, right? If I'm looking to hire somebody, I don't want to wait until I have them as my employee to learn whether or not they want to be a judge one day, to learn whether or not they want to generate a lot of clients on their own or they expect to come to work, do the work that I give them, and go home, right? Because the way that I would structure compensation for somebody who has no interest in going out networking and generating their own clients is different than the person who's like the go getter who wants to generate a big book of business for themselves. They're already doing that and they want to be rewarded for that, right? It requires different mechanisms to work with that kind of person. Similarly, if a person has an expectation that they're going to earn a certain amount based on years of experience, I always tell people your years are only valuable if your years count in the years of what I do, right? So if you've been a practicing lawyer for 20 years and you have 1 year of family law experience, you are not a 20-year attorney when I hire you, right? Because I need 20 years of family law. I might be willing to hire your 1 year of family law plus your 19 years of something else, but 19 years of something else does not become 19 years of family law because you call yourself practicing for 20 years, right? You have 1 year of relevant experience for me. Maybe you can take some skills joined from the other years and tack on maybe another year, but you're not going to tack on 19 years and act as if the skill set that you have at 19 years doing something else is comparable to the skill set you would have doing 20 years of what I need you to do when I hire you. Again, a conversation, right? You need to figure these things out before you bring a person in. And to the extent that the person is presenting with a backdrop that's not compatible with what you desire for your life, for your business, you two are not a match, okay? Not bad, not wrong, doesn't need to be dragged, doesn't require a shouting match, doesn't require a negative statement, just simply not a match, right? So when I look at Love is Blind, I think about matching, in this instance, marriage, in many of the same ways that I think about it in a law firm, right? You have got to have the right attitude, aptitude, and fit in your partner for your marriage to be successful. The same way you have to have the same attitude, aptitude, and fit in your employee for your hiring to be a successful hire. And to the extent that we can learn from some of the shows in pop culture, and we're going to continue to do that periodically on the show, I'm glad to have those conversations with you here on the Crushing Chaos with Law for Mentor podcast. So I'm going to see you on our next episode. And by the way, if you want to learn more about how these types of ideas, right, the idea of getting the right fit for your law firm can really revolutionize your practice, then I want to invite you to check out our website and book a call with a growth strategist on our team at lawfirmmentor.net. All right, we'll see you on our next episode.